So welcome. Welcome to PrepMatters AP US History review class. We're glad you're here. We're glad we can help you through this unexpected time, to keep everybody's learning moving along. And we're here to keep you learning and help you moving towards your long-term goals. Don't know if anybody on the webinar has actually worked with me before, but I'm Ian Lekus. I am Director of Communications at PrepMatters. I'm also a former professor of American history, world history, and literature. At PrepMatters, I tutor not only the standardized tests and work with students on their college essays, but I also tutor APUSH and US History subject tests, AP World and the World History subject test, Lang and Lit, European History, NSL, whole range of tests. And so, it's really exciting to put my professor hat back on and, do what I did, at Harvard, at Tufts, at Cornell, at a few other colleges at the University of Maryland, and share, my passions for teaching history, especially at this bizarre moment. So today is the first lecture, the first conversation, and we're going to start today with a review of the test itself, especially with the information that just came out from the College Board, as well as review periods 1 and 2, colonial history before 1754. And I'll talk about why we're reviewing that in a moment, but I wanted to give you the slideshow that takes us from now through the first test date on May 15th. I'm going to take a guess that at this point, most of you are familiar with Zoom, whether you're a recent student of Zoom, or if you've been using it for other purposes all along. But don't hesitate to shoot us questions if you have, like, how does this work? And we'll do what we can to provide that kind of support. You may have heard by now, we'll get some sense of what you're up to in the class as we go along, as we fix the polling feature. I'm assuming most of you are in APUSH classes right now. There's probably a handful of you in private schools that may not offer AP classes, but are taking the AP exam of your own initiative. And I'll be happy to talk about that, with you in this class or, through emails outside of our time here. As I said, so this year's test will be on Friday, May 15th at 2 o'clock. You're also welcome to make the other alternate date, which will be Wednesday, June 3rd at noon. I had in mind to do a polling question for this, but if you can use the Q&A, this would actually work well too. I'll just read them to get a sense of if you've already decided, do you know if you're going to take the test on May 15th? You're thinking about June 3rd, you want more time to prepare, or you just don't know yet, or didn't even know that there was going to be an option. If you can use the Q&A, not only will that help me, it'll also help my colleagues as they offer other AP review classes as well. We've got classes for Chem, we've got classes for Bio, Calc. You may have seen some of those others. You might even be in some of those other classes right now. At the moment, this class is designed to go through the first test. If there's enough demand for the second date, what I'll probably do is not repeat material, but that I will do practice work with the DBQs, which is the format of the test, the modified DBQ. And I'll say more about that in just a second. First answers for May 15th, great. And if others, and if anyone else wants to chime in, if you have already thought about that, just let me know. Great. So you may have seen what the news was about the format of the test. You're going to be taking it at home. You're welcome to either type it out and upload it to the College Board site, or you're welcome to handwrite the exam as you would be doing in a normal year, and take a photograph of your exam and submit the photo to the College Board. The test is going to be, and I quote from the College Board, open book, open note. The College Board will be using all sorts of digital security tools to prevent plagiarism, and they're also going to be submitting your answers to your teachers if you are in fact in an APUSH class, asking teachers to keep an eye out for any kinds of known inconsistencies if it just doesn't look like your work. Doesn't happen, but as a former college professor dealing with plagiarism, it's not fun to deal with. So I understand the College Board taking that seriously. And certainly one of the ways that they've designed the history tests this year is to be questions that are not easily Googled, easily Wikipedia'd, and don't make for, are just not easy to plagiarize, especially in the fixed 45-minute time frame that you're going to have. All right. So if you are taking APUSH, the chances are you've had practice, in fact, perhaps extensive practice with the document-based questions. The main heart of the question, and you're going to get one free response, modified DBQ, is going to be from periods 3 through 7, 1754 to 1945. You're welcome to bring in the material that we're going to talk about today, periods from 1 and 2 before 1754, but it's not required. Periods 8 and 9, after the end of the Cold War, are not going to be on the test at all this year. The modified parts, but I should say, if you're thinking about taking the subject test, and there's often a lot of overlap between the tests, students taking the tests, all of periods 1 to 9, pre-1492 to roughly 2000, will be on the subject test. Those tests are already written, and you can pretty much count on them covering all of the material. Question about YouTube. Yes, all of these classes will be uploaded to YouTube. Right now, our time frame is somewhere before the next class, so assume before next Monday afternoon. Pretty decent chance that they'll be chopped into pieces. I don't know if they're going to, rather than make you watch the entire 45 minutes to an hour all over again, I think the idea is to break them into more digestible bits. But yes, this will be on YouTube after the fact. So you're going to be using 5 historical sources. You're going to be, you're going to be using the historical skills at the heart of APUSH. And I'll say more about that. But you can assume that, and by the way, I've got subject terms on the website, on the course page for APUSH. You'll see a guide to the themes that I'm about to talk about, as well as the historical skills. You're also going to have a study list up there. Right now, that study list is periods in 1 and 2. Each week, I'll do a new study terms list useful for both tests, APUSH and the subject test, that covers periods 3, 4, etc. And at the end of the course, I'll upload extra materials for those students taking the subject test that covers 1945 to the present, as well as stuff that doesn't neatly fit into category time periods. But with this modified DBQ, you're going to get 5 documents. You might get some newspaper coverage, excerpt from a newspaper. You might get somebody's diary or personal letter, government documents. You may get a table or a chart with data. You might get a cartoon or a painting, some other kind of visual image. And starting next week, I'm going to draw in the actual samples of documents used in previous DBQs to help us think through what you might want to do with them, the kinds of things that you'll see come May 15th and June 3rd. So this test is going to assess your ability to work with those sources and to do the kind of college level historical thinking, analysis, and writing, those skills that you've been building all year. So what are those skills? Hopefully your teachers have been talking about these. Let me just take a look at some new questions. And actually a good question here about the AP tutorials. Yeah, we're actually kind of surprised that the AP lectures are going through the Cold War and past into material that's not on the test. Our best understanding here is that they want to sort of recreate the learning you would be getting if the school year had continued the normal way, but the Cold War is not on the test. The 60s are not on the test, etc. So study those if you're going to take the subject test. I would definitely focus on the historical skills and being able to work and the major themes that I'm going to talk about in a second. So great. Got 2 answers now, by the way, for May 15th. Okay, great. So back to the core skills. These hopefully look familiar to you. Hopefully your teacher's been really, they've been talking about these all year. But that involves developing and supporting a historical argument. Chances are the students who are showing up today already know this. I'll just go over it just in case. But there's a difference between stating a fact, and arguing a thesis, something that a reasonable person could disagree with. The American Revolution began in 1776 is a fact, or it declared independence in 1776 is a fact. There were many causes of the American Revolution. That's still actually a fact. Now on the other hand, saying the American Revolution was effectively was essentially a conservative revolution, or in turn, the American Revolution represented a radical break with the past. Those are, in fact, arguments. Those are theses, and you can support them, and somebody can make a reasonable case, why you're right or why you're not. You're going to be asked to use at least 4 of the 5 documents that are provided to you. You're welcome to use the 5th, and you're going to be asked to analyze those sources. I'll get to that in a second. You're going to want to talk about the context. So let's just use the example of the American Revolution, which we'll get to next time. What we're going, so for context, say you're writing about the American Revolution, bringing up the 7 Years' War would be important context, bringing up how the 7 Years' War bankrupted Great Britain. And so Britain went out of its way to raise as much revenue as it could from the colonies, creating all sorts of resentment and against the various laws and measures of the 1760s and early 1770s that led to the revolution. That's context. Talking about gender roles or labor systems in the late colonial era is context. There's all sorts of ways you can make context. As I said, you're going to have to analyze primary sources, maybe a secondary source, but probably just primary sources. And so for at least 2 of the documents, you're going to want to explain what the point of view of the author is, who's their audience, what's some quality, not just sort of taking the document at face value, but really sort of explaining how we understand it as the document itself as a product of history. And I'll use next week examples from a DBQ from a few years ago about the American Revolution, where the DBQ included some of the kinds of sources you'd completely expect, and some sources that students were like, what's that? And so I'll show you how to handle if they throw something at you that makes you go, huh? So we'll be prepared for that. You're going to talk about causation and significance. And I know that one of the questions before included that as one of the themes that you're going to be one of the skills you want to keep practicing. So what leads to what? How does your evidence support your argument? How does your evidence point to a more complicated argument? What causes what leads to what, and why do we care? Why does this matter? And that starts to get to what makes this upper level history is like, what's the significance? Why is this more than just preparing for trivia night? Because actually sort of starting to see the patterns and the significance really does jump out at why we are bothering to do all of this. And you no doubt have been asked to sort of find patterns again and again through this school year, comparing and contrasting, analyzing what changes and what doesn't, continuity and change over time. And so getting to the not only the who, the what, the where, but what does it mean? Why do we care? I'm not going to go over this slide in future review sessions, but I'm going to leave it. It's up in the PowerPoint that you can download from the PrepMatters TV website, and we'll be continuing to talk about these skills as we go along. All right, so the major themes of APUSH. Chances are some of you will have had your teachers drill these into you. Some of you are seeing them for the first time. Some of you who are like, oh yeah, my teacher said that back on September 10th and has never come back to it. The students who come to work with me at PrepMatters, I get all 3 of those regularly. So I'm going to spend a decent bit of time today using the material from periods 1 and 2 to talk about themes, because it really helps bring order to this just river of information, this flood of information that you've been getting all year. These themes are relatively straightforward. The next few slides, and again, these are on the PrepMatters, the PMTV website. If anybody doesn't have the link, I can share that in the chat or by email, make sure it's included in the next email. I'm not going to bother to read all these. They're relatively straightforward, and you're entirely capable of reading these for yourself. But I do want to emphasize how they come out and how they start to build a tapestry out of again, the flood of information, the flood of data that you've had all year. So it's again getting to what's the significance of all this? What's the significance of X leads to Y? What do they add up to? And it also really just makes this information a whole lot more manageable, because this class and all the AP history classes can reasonably get overwhelmed. I mean, I have students come every October, every November, like, this is a lot harder than all my history classes before. And I get it. And this is one of the tools that I offer students to sort of be like, okay, there's a map here. You have to draw your own map to some degree, but here are some of the tools to do that. And I'm going to help you, particularly because when you're actually writing your modified DBQ, you're going to want to hit on whichever set of themes are relevant to whatever prompt you get that day. And it helps sort of get across a point that I talk about again and again with students. It's easy to say history repeats itself, but history actually, it rhymes more than it repeats. I mean, just to take an obvious example right now, when we're dealing with the coronavirus, I've taught a class on the history of HIV, and I've taught a bit about the Spanish influenza. And I can point to similarities and differences. And there's echoes of the past, the past rhymes. But what we're seeing now is also its own distinct phenomenon. And so thinking about these themes as a way to identify what rhymes rather than what repeats, can really help you develop a nuanced, well-supported, well-thought-through essay, especially given the time frame you've got. The slideshow, the other PowerPoint that you can download from PMTV will be the terms list that I referred to before. And I'm not going to bother talking about period 1 today, because I think given the way the test has been truncated, it's extraordinarily unlikely that you're going to get anything that involves before the Europeans showed up. You will for the subject test again, but I think it's so extraordinarily unlikely that you would see anything like this on the modified DBQ. But I am going to talk about the colonization of the New World, about the English settlements, and about the rise of slavery, and with an eye towards helping you think about these historical skills and these major themes. And thinking about the colonies, particularly with an eye towards material in period 2, and what sets up, period 3, the birth of the Republic, the birth of the United States, and then everything that comes after that. So thinking about the Spanish, the French, and the English, and obviously there are other European powers colonizing the Americas as well, but I'm going to focus mostly on those 3 that really set up the lands that become the United States. And we could talk about pretty much any of the major themes that I just identified that the APUSH class emphasizes. But let me sort of point out, as you're listening to me, listen for material that would fit into a theme about migration and settlement, or about work, labor, and the economy, about geography and the environment. And I should say, just for the environment one, that is the literal physical environment, but it's also the built environment, what humans create around them. And so it's sort of, think about it not only in terms of the trees, the rivers, the oceans, the natural resources, but what humans do to reshape the physical world around them. So talk about the colonization of the Americas, listen for geography and environment, work and labor, migration and settlement, and social structure. It's probably now a good many, many months since your teacher probably blazed through the Spanish arriving in Central and South America and taking over and implementing and conquering the Aztec and Incan empires, and implementing in particular a system called the encomienda system. This was a system, you may remember, through which the conquistador settlers were, quote unquote, given indigenous peoples as workers to work the land, and especially to work the silver and gold mines of the Spanish New World. Many indigenous peoples were converted forcibly to Catholicism. And I bring it up as the first, though clearly not the last, coercive labor system in the New World. and the first one in the New World that's based on what we would later come to think about as race. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how our notions of race are not as eternal as we think they might be. But nonetheless, this was very clearly the enslavement of one population by another. By and large, much of the extractive labor was done in the Spanish New World, in the mining sector. Spain, and in fact, Europe, get quite rich on the silver and gold of Mexico, of Peru, and other parts of Central and South America. If you've taken AP World, you'll remember that the just torrent of silver and gold coming from the New World to Spain and to Europe pretty much changed the world, and that it creates the first common currency, and it fuels European imperialism in the Americas and beyond, ultimately planting the seeds for several more stages of imperialism, and for even a capitalist world as we increasingly will recognize it. And it's just, the Spanish encomienda system, with the kind of forced labor of native peoples of the Americas, sets the stage for, sets a precedent for what the English and others do enslaving Africans in the 16 and 17, 1800s, well, especially the 16 and 1700s for today's purposes. And it also sets the stage for the religious conversion of the people forcibly brought to the Americas. I want to say briefly a few things about the French, but you may remember that the French were heavily involved in the fur trade and go further into the interior of North America. By and large, other than a few settlements around New Orleans, in Quebec, the French presence in North America was much more trading posts for especially the fur trade, and is not as settler-based as the English turned out to be. Don't think you're going to get much on the French, but again, I think both the Spanish and the French are more likely to show up on the subject test. But in terms of the precedent for paying attention to demographics, who shows up, who's aware, it's valuable and certainly could come into a question in early American history. How about the American colonies, or what the original 13 colonies? Particularly starting out with the colonies in New England, the colonies in the Chesapeake Bay, Maryland and Virginia in particular, a little bit later the Carolinas. We'll talk in passing about some of the other colonies as well. But again, all the themes that we're talking about come into play here. I probably not going to have time to get into religion in any depth. There are a bunch of religious terms in the study guide. Happy to take questions now or by email about them. But in terms of the purpose of even setting up the English colonies, realistically, it's important to remember that the Massachusetts Bay Colony was set up as a religious colony. The Virginia colonies were set up as economic enterprises, and this has all sorts of implications for how each grows. One as a secular institution, a secular community, one as a religious community, and including what that means for governance, for the political systems of each colony. I also want to take, with Massachusetts, you've probably been learning about the Pilgrims and the Puritans from early elementary school. You're probably sick of them if you grew up with US schools. But it's worth remembering for the AP exam, both tests of AP included here, John Winthrop and his City on a Hill speech. It's on the terms list, take a look, but it's the speech where he really sets up the idea in 1630 in a sermon of the United States as a city on the hill, a moral exemplar to the world. And this, it sort of really sets up the idea of a American exceptionalism, the idea that the United States is exceptional, is distinct in fundamental character from other countries that may be based primarily on ethnic commonality, on linguistic commonality, on religious commonality. But the idea of the United States essentially as an idea, as a moral example to the world, is one that John Winthrop gave voice to very early on in that City on a Hill sermon. Virginia, on the other hand, about making money. At first, more family, it's more, individual men, not as much as, the French fur trade was really just single men coming over without any families. The Virginia was a little bit of a mix, as opposed to Massachusetts, where it really was families emigrating to set up the colonies. A few of the other colonies that come up regularly, you may remember Maryland was set up as the first Catholic colony, the first colony for English Catholics to come over and have a haven in the New World. Pennsylvania set up as a Quaker colony by William Penn, and Rhode Island set up by Roger Williams as a beacon of toleration, a place where all religious groups were welcome, and very much, as an antidote to the Puritans' rigid ideology. And in fact, Rhode Island was home to some of the very first Jewish communities in the United States, and so to this day has some of the oldest synagogues in the country. Virginia, as an economic enterprise, set up, the first legislature that we would recognize as a forerunner of modern state and federal legislatures, and the sort of just to get the business of business taken care of. And you can occasionally see questions that work in the House of Burgesses, which was founded in 1642, the lower house of the Virginia legislature, and to this day in 2020, that still exists now as the Virginia House of Delegates, and it is the first representative body in the American colonies. Coastal colonies, as you may remember, so at first, pretty much the coast is settled. People don't go far inland, at least in the English colonies. Later on, especially in the later 1600s, settlements begin to approach the Appalachian Mountains, the western frontiers of the original 13 colonies. And that certainly leads to all sorts of conflict with the original native peoples, and sort of when tensions with natives that were always fraught to begin with really begin to deteriorate. I'm not going to have as much time as I wanted to talk about that, but I'm more than happy to take questions, especially since I know one of the things that comes up when I work with students on APUSH is that very few of my students feel like they have a comfortable working knowledge of Native American history. So reach out to me if you feel like that's something you need some guidance on. You'll note that this bullet point here about the population. And I bring it up because I want to sort of emphasize the fact that we don't treat colonial America as static, that in 1620, we're talking about 2,300 people. That may be the size of some of your schools. It's pretty much all at this point in either Virginia or the Plymouth colony in Massachusetts. By 1650, there's 50,000 colonists in in the 13 colonies. 50 years later, that grows 5 times over to a 250,000. By 1750, we're at 1.1, 1.2 million people. And that doubles again in just 26 years when the United States declares independence in 1776. And in fact, by 1776, that 2.5 million figure is, give or take, about a third of the population of Great Britain itself. So in thinking about all of our images of the American Revolution and the ragtag bunch of rebels fighting against the British Crown, the United States was 1/3 the size of Britain, but also had the home field advantage across an ocean. So the growth of from in 150 years from 2,300 people to 2.5 million is quite dramatic, and brings up, for your purposes, writing DBQs, the importance of specificity, the importance of being precise about when and where. You are going to have to make some sweeping claims about change over time, but you also want to sort of take into account the kinds of specificity of whatever you're writing about at the moment. And I bring this up as an example to get away from any idea that the colonial period is a static one. The expansion here, you've taken this much American history by now. You have heard about expansion again and again and again. That's physical expansion, geographic expansion across the continent, 19th century manifest destiny, the 20th century rise of the United States as a global superpower. You know about this expansion of American cities and eventually the suburbs, cities like New York that grew from 10,000 in the colonial period to 1 million in the mid 18th century, to today 8 million. other cities that barely didn't exist in the mid-19th century and now have 1 million, 2 million people. You have studied the expansion of the industrial economy, the expansion, depending on how far you got into the 20th century, the expansion of the power of the federal government, the expansion of a national culture, a media culture. We listen to the same things, we watch the same things, we shop for the same things. More and more that connects us as Americans, and that's recognizable. And in fact, that you can buy anywhere in the world often, and certainly anywhere in the country, that that when you go to Taco Bell in Bethesda and you go to Taco Bell in Washington State, they're not going to be any different. That you listen to the same broadcast, you listen to the same artists, and that sort of the emergence of that kind of national and even eventually global culture is one of those expansions we'll talk about. You read about the expansion of rights, the expansion of all sorts of rights of those Americans who were originally left out of the original notions of citizenship when the US was talking about. And I'm going to use expansion as one of those keywords that should trigger you to think about, okay, which theme am I listening to? The theme, what I just rattled off, gets to all of those core themes about state power, about national culture and national identity, about the relationship to the environment, work and labor, and more. And I want to note that, and I want to note these numbers about the growth of the colonial population, that these numbers reflect these themes. They reflect trend. They reflect the story rather than driving it. And to finish off with the 10, 15 minutes I'll take to finish, I'm going to talk about one particular example of the expansion of the American labor force, and particularly that is the creation of slavery as an institution in colonial America. I'll read this out so everyone can see. This is a super general question. I think they mentioned in today's AP tutorial that they will award up to 2 points for outside sources rather than 1. I assume this is because the College Board believes that all test takers will have access to more materials. So do you have suggestions on how to incorporate outside sources? The AP tutorial used events outside the given time period into responses. So yeah, I was thinking that some of, for example, when I talked about bringing in the 7 Years' War, if you get a question about the American Revolution, or say you have a question about the Civil War and about the constitutional amendments that come out of the Civil War, sort of how in many ways the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that come out of the Civil War are often thought of as an extension of the Bill of Rights. The topics that were not covered, the issues that were not settled by drafting the original 10 amendments that make up the Bill of Rights. So I think events, relevant events, it could be on the other end. So it could be if you're writing also about the expansion of, say, African American voting rights, at least in theory, if not always in practice, after the Civil War. You could talk both about what comes later in terms of the 100-year struggle or more than 100-year struggle, honestly, to make those voting rights real, as well as the expansion of legal rights of women and Native Americans getting the vote, other groups struggling for their own full incorporation into citizenship. So I would think about it that way. So whether it's a specific event, a specific movement that's relevant, so it's in many ways it's the compare contrast factor as well as bringing in the specific evidence. And I'm happy to sort of elaborate that as we go along. So I'm going to talk, with this time, about the last bit of time, about slavery and conditions in England. This is really before Britain had come to full power as an imperial superpower. Certainly is a force to be reckoned with, but not as wealthy and not as powerful as, say, Spain or France at this point. And conditions in England during the 1600s were bad enough that 500,000 people left England out of a total of, give or take, 4 or 5 million residents of England. They didn't all come to the 13 colonies. Some went just to Ireland, others went to the West Indies, but soon the American colonies, and especially the Chesapeake, the tobacco growing regions of Maryland and Delaware and Virginia, drew larger and larger numbers of English immigrants, especially single young men, but also some families. Now, in terms, some of those immigrants could pay their own way. Clergy could, landowners could, public officials could, merchants and artisans. Those people came to the United States as free persons. But in the 17th century, about 2/3 of the English settlers came as indentured servants. These people gave up their freedom for a fixed period of time, often for 5 to 7 years. They could be bought and sold, The indentured servants were subject to physical punishment from their owners. And for female indentured servants, their contracts could be extended if they became pregnant. If they survived their contract, the length of their contract, many did not, they would receive a very small, quote unquote, freedom dues upon the end of their contract and become free persons in the colonies. As the colonial tobacco economy grew, feeding the huge and rapidly expanding demand for tobacco in England and in Europe overall, and as the colonies themselves expanded, the labor force provided by indentured servants proved inadequate. And so the English and other Europeans turned to West Africa for a steady supply of forced labor, whether for tobacco in the Chesapeake or for the sugar in the West Indies or in Brazil. The Portuguese had already built large sugar plantations in Brazil, worked by enslaved Africans. And the sugar plantations of the West Indies, which are, and there are islands and colonies owned by the English, the French, the Spanish, the Dutch, the Danish, all of them used enslaved African labor. Now, I talked a few minutes ago about the encomienda system. And, one of the questions might be, what about, sort of indigenous labor? Well, indigenous labor is by this point being decimated by diseases brought over by Europeans as part of the Columbian Exchange. It's probably the most lethal part of the Columbian Exchange, and chances are you've talked in class about the goods, the crops, the animals that were exchanged between Europe and the New World as part of the Columbian Exchange. But that also included diseases, and those diseases, as you probably know, proved awfully lethal to many indigenous peoples in North and South America and the Caribbean. So you needed something a little different than the encomienda system in the tobacco regions of the Chesapeake and elsewhere in the South. And I want to emphasize, again, I alluded to this before, but that the idea of race as we know it wasn't really set. I mean, there were the roots of it, don't get me wrong here. But by and large, the English and other Europeans were dividing the world dividing it between quote unquote civilized and quote unquote barbarian, between Christian and quote unquote heathen. Not my language, but the language of the 1600s. And in fact, it is the very process of slavery, of creating a system of slavery, that really rigidifies the system of race that we recognize here in the early 21st century. And that you have the emergence, I'll talk about this more today and later on, of legal and political structures and of cultural narratives that divide those people who can be enslaved and those who cannot. So you may recognize this map as the triangular trade. This is the roughly three-way system of trade between West Africa, the regions that are now Nigeria, Ghana, the Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, the Americas, especially the Caribbean, and to some degree Brazil, and the American colonies, and Europe, especially England. You have likely seen the term the Middle Passage. And by the way, if you haven't yet, I really would encourage you all to check out the National Museum of African American History and Culture on the National Mall, which has a breathtaking exhibit on the Middle Passage and the triangular trade. It's devastating, but incredibly well done, incredibly powerful. You have in this period, estimates range from hundreds of thousands to a few million Africans who die in transit, the conditions in the Middle Passage, this link between West Africa and the Americas. That is often thought of, it was just one of the more horrific moments in world history. Laws at first were kind of vague, but the first Africans to arrive in the Americas experienced contract bondage similar to the English indentured servants. But over the course of the 1600s, a new system of lifelong, multi-generational slavery emerged, one that ensnared not only those taken directly from Africa, but their descendants as well, and ultimately defined anyone with any African ancestry as Black. Again, triangular trade, you've got the sense of the map and some of the goods, but I'll basically say, to make it simple, human slaves going from Africa to the Americas. Europe, English especially, goods going, finished products, often guns or textiles going from England to Africa, and a whole range of raw materials going from the Americas, especially North America, to England. So it might be rum, it might be indigo, it might be cotton, it might be tobacco and sugar, lumber, but that's sort of this triangle. Chances are you've also heard the phrase mercantilism. Mercantilism was a pre-capitalist economic system that involved all sorts of trade, but was much more, we could think of it as an extreme isolationist version of capitalism, but it's probably more useful to think about it in terms of directly enriching the royal families and the other nobility of the European powers engaging in this trade. And so, for example, the English colonies were limited in the 13 colonies were limited in who they could trade with, and trade with, the English elites back home. The demand for raw materials by the English at home really fueled the growth of slavery. And in turn, that fueled the economic engine of Britain, which had previously struggled to keep up with the Spanish, as I noted, and fuels the rise of the mighty British Empire across the world and of the Industrial Revolution. Obviously, most slaves, not all, but the majority of slaves are in the South, but Northern merchants grow very wealthy through the slave trade as well, and the ports of New York and Boston grow quite large and quite busy because of their involvement with the slave trade, whether actually transporting slaves themselves or the goods that are exchanged for the human chattel of enslaved Africans. The replacement of the system of indentured servitude by slavery took really a short period of time, and by the late 1600s, slavery had completely replaced indentured servitude as the source of a massive labor force in the colonies. Even by 1770, 70 years later, 1/5 of the colonial population was made up of Africans, whether actual slaves or their descendants. And in the Chesapeake, here in the DMV, that included roughly half of the population. You also have significant slave populations in the newer colonies in South Carolina and Georgia on rice plantations. And you have slaves in the North, nowhere near as many, but you have them in New England, in New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania, working in shops, working as servants, loading and unloading ships, and in-house shops. And over time, as the system grows, the law follows. Owners gained more and more power to discipline their slaves, to force them to marry or prevent them to do so. And increasingly, the notions of free and white became almost interchangeable, and enslaved and African became almost interchangeable. And I'm not sure it's as likely to come up on APUSH, but I want to get across the idea that the experience of slavery forged an African-American population and an African-American culture, or many cultures, that peoples who did not share kin, who did not share language, who had practiced different religions, were all united by the experience of enslavement. And that is what forged the Black America, that forged in its origins. And that what grew out of that blended on many different African traditions, as well as the experiences they found in America and on certain European elements, especially Christianity. There were, of course, individual acts of resistance, all sorts of slaves trying to escape, and slave revolts that reached from New York all the way down to the Caribbean. The Stono Rebellion in 1739 in South Carolina was perhaps the most famous of the colonial period, in which a few dozen British colonists and 30 to 50 slaves were killed. And the fear of a revolt led to tighter and tighter laws confining slaves' lives and allowing slave owners to do more and more things to keep slaves under control. Now, we're going to run short on time, and there's obviously much, much more I could say about the early history of slavery, let alone the entire colonial period, to talk about the First Great Awakening, to talk about English, French, Native American relations, to talk many other urgent topics. And I'll be happy to take questions, and I do think the terms list will help guide you through all those materials. But I want to wind up today. I want to draw your attention to the historical thinking and the skills involved to just really emphasize the importance of time and place. are you talking at any given moment about 1620, 1670, or 1720? Are you talking about the Chesapeake, New England, or another colony? Are you talking about the coastal cities or the inland? Are you tracing the lines of causations, lines that are always twisting and complex? When we talk about something like slavery, and frankly, this is true for many different topics we're going to talk about this semester, oh God, old habits die hard. As we talk about, American history through this review course, the themes come up again and again. Every single one of the themes that APUSH emphasizes is evident in what I just talked about with the history of slavery. Migration and settlement, including the forced migration of Africans. America's connections with the broader world through the transatlantic slave trade and the triangular trade. Geography and the environment and work in economics. Thinking about the key crops of the colonial period, like tobacco, sugar, rice, and eventually cotton, late colonial, early republic era. And thinking about the labor force that is necessary to work in the fields, in the agricultural regions, or in the shops of the cities. Thinking about politics and power, thinking about American identity and culture and social structures. We get the legal institutions, the political institutions that excluded people of African descent from the emerging ideology of liberty, and we get those cultures, those social norms that divide free person from slave. And that certainly has all sorts of implications from the revolution all the way to the present. So I think that probably covers enough for today. It certainly gets across the idea of how central these themes are and the patterns that you can keep drawing all the way through the material we're going to review. We're going to continue next week with the birth of a new republic, the birth of the United States. And again, I will be introducing the kinds of documents that you'll see on a modified DBQ next time. Don't hesitate to reach out with questions. If you use social media, the hashtag PMTV, will help get your questions to us even after the webinar is over. Sometime in the next week, this will be up either in full or in chunks on YouTube. And don't hesitate to reach out with questions or feedback if there's something we haven't done. And I just got a couple more questions, or maybe one more question. Yeah, one more question. The terms list. So if you go to PrepMatters TV, PMTV, you'll see all of the courses that we are offering, including APUSH. And I will make sure that the next email that goes out also has the link if you can't find it. And don't hesitate, just email me at ian@prepmatters.com, and that will get to me. And I can send you the direct link. But the APUSH page has the PowerPoint with the study terms, and it has a PowerPoint with the themes and historical skills. And I'll include, update those next week to include the next period 3. Hope that covers the question. But yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I'll make sure that everybody can find that very easily. So yeah, I think that covers enough for today. I hope this was helpful. Again, don't hesitate to just reach out to me. Okay, great, and the latest email had it, great. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Look forward to at least getting your questions and seeing virtually some of you next Monday. Take care until then.